All right, we're going to just go ahead and get started. It's afternoon, isn't it? Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending the second hearing on the Select Committee on Career Technical Education and Building a 21st Century Economy. I want to thank Assemblyman Hadley for joining us today. I think we can all agree that career technical education, or CTE, is important for our state, our students, and the local economies that will benefit from a skilled and trained workforce. These are policies that we must get right, and as we change the way that we fund education, we must pay close attention to all the programs and their funding as they evolve in the near future. When California implemented the local control funding formula, we saw the dedicated categorical funding for CTE go away, leaving programs across the state on the edge of a funding cliff with no real guarantee of support. We cannot continue to make the same mistakes in our education system time and time again. We must keep CTE programs a priority and innovative. This last year, we were able to get $900 million over the next 3 years for CTE incentive grant programs. It's an investment that will help us sustain our existing programs and reward those who are on the cutting edge. However, what happens when those funds exhaust? How can we not just sustain a CTE program, but keep them innovative, which is really what's going to be important for them to work? We know these programs work, and while this body has embraced the logic behind local control funding formula, as policymakers and stewards of our state's economy, we must acknowledge the historic pressures on CTE. Without sustainable funding, CTE will fall by the wayside. That's why we're here today. We'll discuss the future of career technical education, current programs, the CTE incentive grant program, and perhaps most important, we will also touch upon what CTE will look like after the dedicated funding stream comes to a close in the next 2 years. We are lucky to have a wonderful panel today, including representatives from the California Department of Education, the Department of Education, members of the education community, labor, and manufacturers. I would now like to open it up to the members of the Select Committee if they would like to make some brief comments. Mr. Hadley.
Yes, thank you, Chairwoman Burke, and I'm really pleased to be here. I would just want for all of us to keep two big mismatches in mind as we think about this. The first is the mismatch between the needs of the employers of our state and the skills of so many young Californians. That mismatch between the needs and the skills is the biggest single thing holding back many young Californians from achieving their California dream and holding many California employers from doing as much business in the state as they would like to do. And the second big mismatch is just the very significant percentage of young Californians who need CTE, who need vocational training, and the percentage of our resources, particularly our post-K-12 resources, that are dedicated to CTE. And we have a lot of work to do in this area, and I'm really pleased to be here, and I thank you for your leadership on the issue.
And we have been joined by Assemblymember Wood. Mr. Wood.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, for calling this together, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I think this is a really, really critical subject, and certainly in my district in particular, since we all know our own districts probably better than anything. I go back to times when there were more robust programs and the opportunities that were available for people in those days. And I look at my brother, for example. I chose to go on to college and on to professional school and get my doctorate and ultimately somehow end up here. But that's a whole other story. He, on the other hand, while in many ways I believe is much brighter than me, which is why he's not here, chose to pursue vocational training programs that actually have led him to a marvelous career with Boeing in Washington. And so were it not for those opportunities 30 plus years ago, who knows where he may have ended up. And so I think we have, over time, we have just by our policies, we have let a lot of these programs go, and we know now how difficult they are to bring back. So it was a huge mistake for us to let them go, and it's important that we find a way to bring some of these programs back, but more importantly, make the commitment to keep them even in bad times. So I look forward to the outcomes of our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's get started with our first panel. Russell Weichel from the Department of Education. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, Assemblymember Burke. Thank you for having me here today. Career technical education has seen certainly some fiscal changes over the last few years with the change in how schools are funded and going from the demise of categorical programs. We had a short period of time when we went into flexibility where schools actually had the categoricals were there, but they could use them for any educational purpose. And we saw at that time some negative effects on career technical education programs, and depending on the district and the situation they were in. And then with the new local control funding formula, we also started to see some devastation on programs, particularly those that are offered through regional occupational centers and occupational programs, because that funding was rolled then into a local control funding formula. And I think the legislature and others realized that before local control funding formula could be fully implemented, even those districts that wanted to offer career technical education may have not had the funds to do that. And I think that's why this last year we saw this $900 million for the CTE incentive grant come down. And really, that a CTE incentive grant, I like to think of it as a bridge between, so it's a limited term funding, but it's really the bridge for those districts that want to continue to offer career technical education, give them the monies to do that for a short period of time until the local control funding formula, and I hate to say is fully implemented because it may not ever be fully implemented as far as there's not a max on that. And so, but give the districts that time to do so. So I think that was important. I think the other important piece that really has come along in the last few years is California Career Pathways Trust. There was a little bit of controversy with the trust funds only because it was highly competitive. There were 39 grants awarded statewide, which doesn't sound like very many, but I think almost every school district in the state was affected by that trust funds in some way or another. I can give you some examples. So in Sacramento area, we have 5 counties that have joined together in that trust effort and are receiving, schools and districts in those counties are receiving monies through those trusts. I think the one thing the trust has done more than anything is really focused on building strong partnerships. So and when I mean partnerships, it's not only K-12 and post-secondary, so community colleges, but it's really getting the employers involved in education in a way and bringing those employers to the table in a whole different capacity than we've ever seen them. Historically, schools have approached employers and businesses as a way to provide additional funding for a program or donate a piece of equipment or sit on an advisory panel, those kind of things. But what we're starting to see now is business and industry sitting at the table and helping to design the curriculum that is happening so that they actually are, the schools are actually producing students that have the employability skills to go to work for that particular business or industry. And that is carried over to the CT incentive grant as well. So what we're starting to see, or at least hear about, because the money is just, that money is just going out, but what we're starting to see with the CT incentive grant is those strong partnerships already being established and continuing that effort. The one thing that I will say that what I personally like about CT incentive grant is there was some money within that grant, 1% of the grant that came through the CDE. We had to put that money out locally, but it helped support technical assistance professional development for schools. So what the CDE has done is we've divided the state into 7, I refer to them as mega regions. So we've divided the state into these 7 mega regions, and we've taken into consideration the workforce development boards service areas in their regions. And in fact, our regions encompass theirs in a way that we don't cut any of their regions in half or destroy any of their regions. We just embrace their regions. And we also took into consideration the community college regions and how they're aligned and so forth. And what we're doing is, with that 1%, is we have offered competitive grants to one county office within each of those 7 regions that will be, for lack of a better term, an extension of CDE to provide high-quality professional development that we may not have the expertise or the staff to do so, and also to provide technical assistance for those agencies that are receiving these funds in order to build the high-quality programs. The other thing I think that's important to know about the CT incentive grant is that that grant really aligns with our career technical education state plan. In our state plan, there's 11 elements listed of a high-quality CT program, and when you look at the legislation that was passed for the CT incentive grant, you see 10 indicators of high-quality programs. Those are almost word for what's in our state plan. So it aligns with our state plan. We're focused and approaching it that way. We've set up this system of regional delivery of high-quality professional development and technical assistance so schools, once they get the money, can move forward in developing these high-quality programs. So I think it's really provided an opportunity for this state to really build a structure to help ensure that the CTE that we see in the future is focused on the needs of business and industry. In fact, has employers and businesses at the table to help design the curriculum, to help meet their needs, and really strong partnerships between secondary and post-secondary so that there's a seamless transition for students, so that if students are in a K-12 system, can move seamlessly into the community college or an apprenticeship program and then move right into employment. So I think those are some essential things about both the Career Pathways Trust and the new CT incentive grant.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? I do. I do. I do. Shocker. So I'm curious what your kind of plans are after the dedicated funding for CT from the state goes away. What does that look like?
Well, I think that's going to be a decision. It's hard for me to answer, I think, from a state perspective. It's really a local decision now with a local control funding formula. I think I do have some concerns. And I think my concern is that in many regards, the local control funding formula assumes a level playing field for all disciplines that are offered in a school. For instance, but many of those subjects are required for college entrance. Many of those are required for high school graduation, and a few of those are tested. So when you're an administrator at a high school and you may have limited funds, then you're going to put your funds to those things that you're held accountable for, that are required for graduation and required for college entrance. So that, in a lot of regards, drives where you put your money. And your heart could be in many other areas. It could be in delivering art education, music education, career technical education. But if knowing that those other things are tested and you're held accountable for, that's where you're going to put your money. So I do have a concern in that regard. So really, if you want to say that career pathways are important, I think you need to tie them back to accountability because what we measure and what we fund is what gets done.
Thank you, and I'd like to welcome Assembly Member Patrick O'Donnell. And this would actually be a good time, Patrick. Sorry, I know you just walked in for if you have any comments you want to make or introductions.
No, I appreciate the presentations and the topic.
Okay, thank you. Next, Amber Alexander. Oh, you have a comment? Oh.
Yeah. Mr. Weichel, thank you for being here. I just want to make two comments. One, echoing what Mr. Wood said in his opening statement. It is very hard to rebuild these programs once we have lost them. We have learned that. We definitely don't want to have to learn that again. With respect, I believe that it is highly, highly optimistic to think that this is going to be solved at the local level as a result of the local control funding formula. I know that in my district, the most important CTE institution in my district is the Southern California Regional Occupational Center, and you mentioned the Regional Occupational Centers in your remarks. And they have successfully been awarded under the competitive grant process, which is a great thing, and it's a testament to the success of the early success of that program last year. But nobody is viewing these grants as a bridge to the local control funding formula working. They are viewing these as a lifeline until either the governor changes his policy or we have a new governor when this governor's term is up, because I simply believe I represent 6 school districts in my assembly district, and in talking to these school districts across my assembly district, I do not believe that school board trustees are being elected on the basis of their commitment to CTE. I don't believe they're going to be elected on the basis of their commitment to CTE, and where it would be like asking school districts to fund public safety or vice versa. This is, we are trying to jam a round peg into a square hole here. And your last statement, I think, is the most important, that what gets tested, what gets held accountable, and what gets funded is what gets done. Right. And we're at very grave risk of CTE not getting done past the 3-year life of these grants, in my view.
Yeah, and I think my earlier comments about it's really the responsibility of the locals. If I'm not getting money at the department in the form of categorical programs and I don't have funds to put out to LEAs, there's not much or if CTE is not a graduation requirement, there's not a whole lot of influence in a local control state that the department has to force districts to do that work. That's really what I meant. And you're absolutely right that we've seen several ROPs close around the state. The other thing that we're starting to see now that is kind of new to us is, we have, in the past, we had single district ROPs. LA Unified, Long Beach, where San Francisco, big districts could have their own ROP within their district, so we saw that. Those pretty well dissolved away during flexibility because the district said, well, this is our single ROP and it's only our students, so we're just going to offer CTE to everybody. We're not going to call it a ROP, and we're going to fold those dollars in and maybe even utilize them in other areas. So most of the single district ROPs no longer exist. So what we're left with is county-run ROPs, and we're left with joint powers authorities ROPs. And the interesting thing that we're starting to see now is we're receiving a lot of questions at the Department of I'm involved in a county-run ROP, but we want to break away from them, and we want to form our own JPA ROP. So we're having questions now about new JPA ROPs forming out there and moving away from the county. I don't know. We're trying to get a handle on what the motivation is for doing that, since there is no longer any ROP funds. But part of the situation might be that within the CT incentive grant, that piece of legislation, it said that JPA ROPs were eligible for the funds. County offices were also eligible, and those county-run ROPs were funded, but through the county office, directly. And so we're not sure where that motivation is coming from, but we are hearing from a lot more that want to form their own joint powers agreement, ROPs.
And I think we've heard similar in our office. Yeah. I think it's for them maybe an opportunity to pool those funds together, especially in the concern that the funding is not so. And
I will say this as well. So within the CTE incentive grant, the way that it's really a non-competitive grant. The way the competition works is the LEA proving that they can meet those 10 quality criteria. That's if they can prove that, they're going to be funded, and it's basically a formula, kind of a funding. And you could join a consortium, you could stand on your own and apply. And the interesting thing for us is what we actually saw is many districts not applying for the monies themselves, but releasing their funds to the local ROP. So it could have been a county-run ROP, could have been a JPA ROP, but the district will not receive any funds directly from CDE to do this work. The money will flow through either their county office or their JPA, and then they will do the work for those districts. And we saw many districts doing that.
Thank you. Next, Amber Alexander, Finance Budget Analyst, Department of Finance. Thank you for coming.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Amber Alexander with the Department of Finance. To follow up on Director Weichel's presentation, I'd like to share some remarks about the administration's approach to CTE, specifically during the transition to the local control funding formula. I'd also like to discuss ways in which the incentive grant program was designed to be consistent with the administration's principles. The first principle to mention is that preparing students for college and careers and responding to workforce needs throughout the state, and in particular in specific regions of the state, is important to the administration. Second, funding allocated to districts through the local control funding formula is intended to pay for a full range of educational costs, and school districts are the entities that are in the best position to make decisions about the educational programs that they offer. Third, the administration recognizes that the transition to local decision-making can be difficult, particularly for programs with disproportionate costs and programs that are sometimes sporadic in nature, as is often the case with establishment and maintenance of CTE programs. In line with this third principle, the administration proposed and the budget includes short-term transition funding, recognizing the districts that opt to make investments in CTE with their local resources during this transition to local decision-making. Specifically, the 2015 Budget Act contained $900 million to be allocated over 3 years in the form of matching grants to LEAs, with the goal of encouraging them to maintain or create new CTE programs. The governor's proposed budget includes $300 million for the second year of incentive grant funding. The CTE incentive grant was designed to be consistent with the administration's approach to CTE in the following ways. First, the program provides short-term funding to assist with a portion of the upfront costs commonly associated with creating and establishing high-quality CTE programs. The second, the amount of the incentive grant that districts can receive decreases as LCFF funds increase over time. This is consistent with the administration's expectation that school districts must ultimately decide at the local level to support CTE with their LCFF funds. Third, as Director Weichel described, funding for the CTE incentive grant is allocated based on student and district characteristics, which is consistent with the LCFF formula. Finally, we'd like to note that, as the name implies, this program is intended to be an incentive to school districts to invest in CTE for those districts that opt into the program's baseline conditions. The fact that the state board is expected to ultimately spend the entire amount that has been provided by the state is encouraging to the administration, and a sign that local school districts will continue to offer these CTE programs that will have meaningful benefits to their students. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions from committee members.
Of course I do. Of course. You know, I'm curious, you use the word sporadic, and I'm wondering if the reason that CTE programs in the past have been sporadic is because their lack of funding. And what my question for you would be is something that Mr. Weichel had mentioned, was if it was tied to the accountability of the success of the local control funding formula, do you actually think that they would be so sporadic?